Welcome back. Good to be here. Haven't seen you in a little bit.
Good. Welcome back, dude.
Welcome back to you too.
Thank you, dude. How are you?
Shout out to Chesky Asaf.
Interesting.
Shout out. You know who you are. Sitting in my office. We have an amazing episode this week with an evangelical Christian turned rabbi.
Yes.
For those who do not know, what's an evangelical Christian?
So it's a fascinating story that Rabbi Sanders shares with us. You call him Rabbi Sanders, right?
For sure.
And I almost don't even want to spoil it. It's a story unlike any other that we've heard here.
You don't want to spoil it, but you're going to?
I'm contemplating whether or not to spoil it. I don't want to, but just brace yourself for delving into an area where you probably have very little information.
Yeah.
Very, very likely that you'll be hearing things that you've never heard before. This is a man who was deep, deep, deep into Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
And he tells the story of his search and his yearning for meaning and for purpose and for truth. He was just seeking out truth, and he was willing to go to the end of the world to find it.
To the nth degree.
Yes, to the nth degree. And he really traveled the world physically, spiritually, emotionally. He traveled all around the world to find the truth in Yiddishkeit. And he has a fascinating journey, and he shares it in great detail.
He does. And we can't wait for you to listen to this episode. But first, we want to talk to you about a new book we have sitting in front of us. That's Shalti.
Oh, and you do not take the challenge.
To not sing?
To not sing.
I'm not a singer until this thing is on.
Very deep.
Momo. Shalti 3. Halachic challenges for the whole family based on the weekly parsha from the Torah-observant Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein.
There you go.
Zilberstein. Anyways, you were looking through this book.
It's a beautiful, beautiful, awesome book. We're recording this right on the Erev Shabbos of Parshas Noach. That's when we're recording this.
We are.
And I just took a quick peek in here, and we know that a lot of animals made their way into the Teva.
That's what they did.
And what they do here in this book is they bring out fascinating halachic questions related to the parsha, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, kid, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but kid goes to the zoo and he sees an elephant, and the elephant is there on the ground, and he gets all excited, and he hasn't seen an elephant, and he's about to make his bracha of Mishan Habrius, which is a beautiful bracha that we make when we see wild animals. And he noticed that the elephant was like sleeping on the ground. So he's thinking like, oh, can I make a bracha on a sleeping elephant? He's like, yeah, I can. And he makes the bracha. And as soon as he finishes the bracha, the crane that he did not notice starts lifting the elephant.
Which was deceased?
And now he asks himself, was that a bracha levatala? And he has to find a live elephant in the zoo to make another bracha?
What a challenge.
Or can a bracha of Mishana Habrius be appropriately chal on an elephant that is no longer alive?
Rumor has it that kid is still in the zoo looking for another elephant.
And you'll have to check out Achas Sha'alti to learn the answer.
And luckily, we have a promo code for you. That's Achas, ACHAS, MP. You get 20% off plus free shipping.
Look at that.
Like you're practically paying nothing. 20% off plus free shipping. That's Achas 3 MP. We got the link in the description, in the show notes. You're going to love this book.
And your kids will.
Yeah. So go ahead and read it with your family. And we want to give another mention to one of our sponsors for today, and that is What?
You mean Touro University, don't you?
I do mean Touro University.
Interesting.
They're not just a college, they're a university.
They really are.
And we want to talk about one of their trailblazers, who is Todd Kahn.
What a guy.
Todd Kahn. He manages one of the wealthiest, most successful luxury brands in the world.
Coach.
Over $5 billion in.
They do $5 billion in sales? I don't know. Naki's going to go to the fact-checking section.
$5 billion in sale each year.
Wow.
That's almost like HBAS, no?
Oh, nice. Nice name drop there.
Right, HBAS Solutions.
Very deep. But this is a fascinating gentleman who got his start at Touro University, went on to Ivy League law school, practiced law, and now is the CEO and brand president at Coach. and is doing fascinating things. I actually learned something very cool from him.
Oh, what did you learn?
He quoted, I think it was Winston Churchill.
Oh, the old church.
Yeah. Speaking of evangelical Christians.
Yeah, hello, Gavriel.
Very deep. The Winston Churchill quote that I think that he said was that success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it's the willingness to continue that matters.
And that's Todd Kahn right there quoting Winston Churchill, a trailblazer at Touro University. So go ahead, you know what to do. Head to the show notes, head to the description here, and click that link that has Touro all over it and get your journey started. Because, hey, you might be the CEO of Ferragamo.
How are you?
Or you might be the CEO at Suit Central or Emporio or Louis Vuitton. Who knows? But get your,
Who knows?
Get your journey started at Touro and enjoy the rest of this episode. You are listening to the Meaningful People Podcast.
The podcast featuring our nation's most impactful, influential,
and meaningful people. Hey, Rabbi Gavriel Sanders. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. This is a long time coming because you don't live too far away. Like, you're right down the street. And it happens to be, I was going through some of my email and I saw an email from you from a while ago. I'm like, wait a minute. This would be an amazing episode. So
right?
I'm glad we're here.
So we're prepared to be amazed?
I think so.
It's a lot of pressure.
We just set the
expectation management.
Yeah, we just set the bar really high, so we'll just have to do what we do. Some guests have this, skill that we focus on. Some have a story. I think you have both. But what really attracts us to having you on this podcast is your story. You weren't always Jewish. You weren't always a from Jew, a rabbi. In fact, like maybe the polar opposite.
That's very good.
Yeah?
Polar opposite. Yes, that's right. I, first of all, began this life journey, or as I like to say, the mothership dropped me off at a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
She gave me a name that I asked her one time about it, where I got my middle name, and the one on my birth certificate and my driver's license.
What is your middle name?
Wynn, W-Y-N-N.
Wynn?
Yeah.
W-I-N-N.
Well, my first name is Mark.
Right, Mark Wynn Sanders.
Yes, that's right.
I feel like Wynn is usually like W-Y-N-N.
It is W-Y-N-N.
But you got W-I.
As a last name.
W-Y.
Oh, you got W-Y.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Edit. Okay.
No, Nachi's making a lot of mistakes these days. We're just going right through it. I don't know.
You're good.
So she said she named me after a drugstore.
Huh.
Winn-Dixie?
Like Winn-Dixie, yeah.
Yeah, but that was in the South. That's a supermarket.
Right. Yeah.
So apparently it's some drugstore, whatever. So we have this expression in Hebrew that says kishmo kenhu. Mm-hmm. So I figured that sort of gave me a little insight on my teenage years, so it was pretty interesting challenges there. I was born into a family that really could have been the poster people for a fractured way to live. It just didn't work out. My mother and my father got together through, some strange external influences. He was a deep South country boy. She was a big city Chicago girl. Oil and water.
Sounds like a movie in the making.
Didn't mix. Yeah, well, it was definitely in the tragic category. Because at 2.5, the father figure fades to black in the background of my life, appearing periodically on the periphery. And I grew up with a mother who was trying to figure out every year what she wanted to do and be. So we were constantly moving, which meant I was constantly changing schools, which meant I was always the new kid with no old friends. So the audience had a collective, yeah, that's right. So that constant mobility, on the one hand, made me very flexible and adaptable. But on the other hand, I really had no depth in my life. I remember distinctively in the 5th grade visiting the home of a friend of mine, and I lived in Palm Beach, Florida for a little bit. And I felt so strange because for me, normal was subnormal. Right. So for anybody else, normal would be abnormal to me. So it was normal for me tonight. It's a lot to think about.
It's a little early for that.
Keep drinking.
For those listening, we're recording this one early morning episode.
Obviously, because now he's drinking a Coke.
Exactly.
The official morning drink of non-coffee drinkers.
So I grew up in the time of the greatest music ever, the Beatles. And in my generation, we're still suffering from PTSD of the breakup of the Beatles the loss of Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison. And,
Yeah.
So it was not only that I grew up in a very mobile situation family-wise, the whole youth of America at that time were in mobile mode. I keep remembering the song by Steppenwolf, that Born to be Wild. Mm-hmm. And we really were. So I caught enough of the hippie.
Surely might have to patch in some soundtrack there.
Yeah.
Get your motor running. Yes, head out on the highway. And
got some vocals.
At 15, I reached the conclusion that I knew everything that was needed to function in life. And I told my mother, I'm not going back to 10th grade. It's like October, November that year. I said, I'm done. So I went and got a job in a hospital for minimum wage, which I think was somewhere around $1.25 an hour in those days.
What did you do there?
What did I do there?
Yeah.
I pushed people around from their rooms to the X-ray department and processed the X-rays on the Paco machine and things like that, and exposed myself to radiation.
That's a pretty solid job for a 15-year-old, I'd say.
Yeah.
It could be worse. You could be working at Winn-Dixie or something.
Yeah, Winn-Dixie. Yeah, Winn, right. Friction proofing. So the call of the wild, if you will, to quote the old book, was really strong on me, the whole street scene. And every teenager goes through what's called differentiation, where you make that transition from the dependency and identification with your nuclear family to your friends, your peer group, their opinion. You start trying to live in the shadow of their expectations of you. And I certainly did that. Also, I just didn't like the home environment. We were poor. Who likes that? Right. It's not just that we were poor. I knew we were poor. Here's, like, for example, 9th grade. 2 pair of pants. Corduroy, wide swale, stovepipe. And you know what's amazing? Is as you grow, the pants don't. Mm-hmm. So by the time I hit April, I look like a Chassid from Williamsburg. And if you walk into it's 9th grade public school, and if your objective is, I want to make a good impression on the ladies of the set, you walk by and your pants are like that high up above your ankle. It's just not a cool scene. So
at least without the payas, because then you don't complete the look.
Right.
Yeah. If you go all in, you're all in on the look.
I'm a fan of corduroy though. We should bring it back a little bit. I think it's a lost art. The corduroy pants.
I can see the advertisement now.
Yeah,
Hasidim and corduroy.
Do the Hasidim still wear corduroy?
No, they don't, but they expose their socks.
Yes.
I think that was the reference.
I get it, but we could get the corduroy back maybe.
Yeah, bring the corduroys back.
Okay.
I'd like to say corduroy Bekasha.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
That would be Gaelic.
This episode is sponsored by G&G. Let's get that rolling.
Brought to you by Asia Style.
Yeah.
There was no spirituality in my home. Right. My mother grew up a troubled, I would say, cooled-off Catholic. My father was kind of a burnt-out Southern Baptist. So there was no spirituality. Now, my mother, trying to be a good, dutiful Catholic from guilt, sent me to Catholic school for first, second grade. And there I got enough understanding that, as I've said this many years, that God had a last name. What was God's last name? Zilla.
Godzilla. I got it. Yeah, quicker than you, I think.
Because the imagery in my mind was of something, something angry, fire-breathing, unapproachable. You just didn't want to go there.
Not a good feeling, not a good image to have, probably.
And of course, we had a parallel in Santa Claus, because the song said he was making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice.
Yeah.
So the original Santa Claus was not a nice guy. Coca-Cola did a remake of him in the 1930s, and he became jolly and fat, and and
is that right?
Yes.
Santa was created by Coke. No.
The image of Santa today was
the image
by
of Santa.
Coke. Yes. The going way back hundreds of years. The whole Saint Nicholas idea, and there were other shadowy characters in Europe that were designed to intimidate and control children. And so that was one of them. So Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, has done a really good study on this, which anybody can Google. It is well worth looking at, especially as we're coming up to the December holiday a few weeks from now. He did a whole piece on December 25th and its origins, as well as the Sylvester holiday. Because in Israel, a lot of people celebrate Sylvester, January 1st. They have no idea the serious pagan foundations behind it, and why they shouldn't do that. So that's another discussion.
Yeah.
So
you figured out life. You figured out life. You're working in a hospital, pushing cards, $1.25.
Yeah. So our family moved to Texas, and I found out the power of my thumb to cause cars to stop, and people would give me rides. So one fine day in Texas, I put out my thumb, and a truck stopped.
Now the power of our thumb is to engage an Uber app. Back then, that meant something else.
That's correct. Absolutely. And you can't do that move in every country either. Mm-hmm. So, but I got into a vehicle that took me 2.5 days. Well, it was a series of them to California.
For real?
I'm 15 years old. I'm hitchhiking from Dallas, Texas to California.
No way.
Yeah.
How'd that go? Like, that's not...
Well, I wanted to sleep when I got into these trucks because they had these sleeper cabs.
Yeah.
And the truck drivers wanted to talk.
Yeah, like, I imagine, what's the motivation for a trucker to pick up someone to go?
Kid?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of categories could be covered in that one, but mainly they're on the road. They're these cowboys of the highway, and they want somebody to talk to.
Right.
And so some of them were kind of animated. I figured they were on bennies. They dropped something that was little white pills that make them stay awake for 16, 18 hours. So I got to Huntington Beach, California. This was only a long time ago, 1968. Yeah. And I'm here in California at that time of year. They have something called June gloom. So it was the month of May, but it was coming up on a very cloudy, kind of gray. And so here I am in Huntington Beach. Now, I was thrilled to be in Huntington Beach. Why? Because Huntington Beach was one of the surf capitals of the West Coast.
Sound like a guy that surfs.
I definitely was.
Yeah,
I lived in the water. 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I was an avid surfer in Florida. I had my couple of encounters with sharks and barracuda and of course the worst thing in the world, jellyfish. You're paddling out and get jellyfish in your bathing suit. That's not fun. It was so here I am finally back in the water
in LA.
And it was like totally cool. But mind you, I'd been dropped off in Huntington Beach. I knew nobody.
You had nowhere to stay?
No money. I had no food. I had nothing. I had the few clothes I was wearing and a few in a little army bag that I was carrying.
You're homeless.
You could say that. Yeah, I was homeless.
You were what? You were still at that? You were 15, 16?
I was still 15. Yeah, coming up on 16. Yes, but it didn't matter because in those days, street culture kind of took care of itself.
The world was a weird place then. It sounds.
Yes.
People were just trying to find themselves, maybe.
Yes. So I spoke to some people on the street and I said, "Hey, man, you know any place I can crash?" Which was not coming off of drugs. It meant a place I could sleep. I said, "Yeah, man, I know some people down here. They're cool, man. They deal." So in other words, they were in business, if you will. So I ended up in this little, it was almost like a railroad car apartment, but it was 15 feet by maybe 8 feet and no bathroom. That was down the alleyway. 6 people sleeping on the floor in this place. And I said, "Well, what do you do for food?" They said, "Well, there's this place on Main Street," and there was a place on Main Street called the Teen Challenge Gospel Light Club. Now we're getting interesting. It's a Gospel Light Club. Gospel. Godzilla? So I began going to the Teen Challenge Gospel Light Club at night, where you would either watch a film that they would show that had some Christian overtones to it, or somebody would stand up and talk about their life transformation, how they'd been profligate or whatever they were in their life, and how they came to believe in JC, and that created an internal revolution, and now all of a sudden their life was amazingly in order, and they were productive and happy and fulfilled. And then the capper was, after you heard the Bible rap, as it were, they gave out free sandwiches from the catering trucks, the day-old sandwiches.
That's how they got
Nothing like a day-old tuna sandwich, man. So that's why I went, was for the food. And then they had the workers there, like, we would call them like kiruv workers, lahavdil. And I remember this guy named Arnie would come over to me and say, "Yeah, man, I used to hang out in Acapulco, and, I was like really into this scene down there, and whatever. And then all of a sudden, I found God. God found me, and I opened my heart, and he changed my life. And I'm here talking to you today because, man, I've had this amazing change. I just want to share it with you because, God loves you, has a plan for your life. And I'm sure you understand that the way you're going is emptiness, right? I mean, look at you. What are you doing?" And I'd agree with him. I had no direction. I had no purpose to speak of.
And you're an impressionable 15-year-old.
Absolutely. And of course, my druggy friends from the street all said, listen, man, don't let them get you in the back room. The back room over there, they get you on your knees. They're going to put their hands on your head and start talking some funny language that you don't know. And they're going to make you believe in God, man. Don't come bring that back into our place, man. Bring something better than that,
Like tuna sandwiches.
Yeah. Or something smokable. So those were crazy days. Mama's crazy days. Well, you know what? I ended up in the back room. Yeah. Down on my knees. And they gave me these words to say, this little prayer to pray. I had really no idea. All I knew was
what language they were referring to.
Well, have you heard of the expression called speaking in tongues?
No.
Good. Look it up sometime. It's part of the.
Should he though look it up?
It's part of the spiritual heritage of a branch of the fundamentalist Protestant movement called Pentecostals, okay, or more sophisticatedly charismatics, and they believe that they, by virtue of their faith and something called the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which is a secondary spiritual experience to water baptism and conversion, that they are imbued with some special personal spiritual language which they can just speak. It's like it sounds like somebody just speaking syllables.
The hiji-biji. It's like very...
Something like that, yes. Oh, you got it. Say it again. Say that 15 times real fast.
You guys are now all Christian.
So it was, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail necessarily, but it was one of many things that I would find along the way to be very strange about the branch of Christianity that I ended up in. So let's fast forward, though, because I decided after a few days there in Huntington Beach that this was not going anywhere. So it was time for me to go somewhere, right? So I packed up my little bag and my little army hat and my pea coat, and I put out my thumb again, ended up in Oceanside.
Oceanside, California.
Yes. A little meter cop, ones with little motorized tricycles, stopped me and asked me, who are you, son, and where are you going? Give me some ID. I had a Social Security card. So I claimed that I was going back to Texas. I think that's what I was doing. He let me go. But he called a nice-looking Uber for me, the California Highway Patrol. Mm-hmm. And they took me for a 3-day stay at the San Diego Juvenile Detention Center.
Because you were just unaccounted for, and you were minor.
Right. I was 15 years old on my own, so I said I was 17, but I didn't really look it. So
CHP, not to be confused with the PCH, which is the Pacific Coast Highway, which is glorious.
Yes.
California.
Yes.
CHP, not as much.
Curiously, there had been some secret correspondence between my parents. My father lived, this is a geographic test for you guys and for anybody else watching. Where are the Seychelles Islands?
The who?
See, that's what
Seychelles. The Seychelles Islands.
Seychelles Islands. And if you can spell
She sells seashores. Seychelles.
Sally.
Yes, Sally does that, yes. And if you can spell Seychelles. So all you have to do is go to Kenya, Nairobi down to Mombasa, the coast, swim out about 1,000 miles.
Seychelles.
And you'll hit the Seychelles Islands. My father lived there, worked there. He was in charge of the diesel power station for a satellite tracking operation downrange. And he'd been in all kinds of strange parts of the world. He'd been in Oman and the Emirates and the Bahamas and Ascension Island, South Atlantic, and all over the world except in my world.
Was he hitchhiking all these places, or?
Well, most of them were kind of water.
Yeah, places, so I'm kind of curious how he really saw the world like that, how he got around.
He did. He was a very practical man, very... as I got to know him later in life, was one of those persons that his emotional vocabulary is very limited. Mm-hmm. I wondered at times if he knew the difference between mad, sad, and glad. There are people like that. They're not emotionally aware.
I feel like that existed a little bit more in the previous generation.
Yes.
You find that a lot nowadays, is that just maybe people didn't have the emotional intelligence to express themselves, and I don't not to like generalize an entire generation, but
well, it wasn't cool either.
I'm sure not.
Especially for a guy like him, he was a tough guy.
Right.
My father had the ability to walk up to a 50-year-old tractor, stare it down, take it apart, and put it back together. Mm-hmm. So
that's what all the cool people are doing.
Sometimes
I did that last Sunday.
Sometimes he'd look at me and say, I'd take apart a tractor, put it back together. I'd do the same to you. No. So he was a tough guy. We had a 4-month living together experiment that didn't work out very well.
Around that time of your life?
Yeah, my mother had been corresponding with him, and he came into America and found me. Now, the whole story behind I'm in San Diego, nobody knows where I am, and how he found me. That's a story in itself, but unnecessary here. Bottom line, I ended up in Seychelles Islands for 4 months.
Wow.
Paradise, absolute paradise. Today that place you have to be part of the uber rich to go there and live there. But in those days, there was no airport yet. You had to go 3 days by boat. And it was idyllic. In any other sort of emotional scenario, it would have been just a great place to be. He had a new family, and then everything was starting over for him in some respects when I look back on it. We had a house right on the seawall. I could look out. Here's the Indian Ocean right out. I could jump into the water if I wanted to. We had servants, and it was a great life. He put me back in school, which I didn't want to be in. Mm-hmm. Catholic Boys College, it was called. So I'm back with the Catholics. I'm back in school. The only distinguishing thing that I could do in those days would be on the swim team. I was a good diver, good swimmer. So back to the water. But as far as academics or investment in the family or anything, I was just not there. I was too hippified, let's say. I was only interested in the hip culture of those days. So I created enough chaos that he came home one day and said, the boat leaves tomorrow at 4:30, you going to be on it. And I was. So I went back to my mother in Texas, and I went back to the street scene. It's very funny. My mother actually left Texas, left me behind. Months later, I came to California. And when I came back to California to kind of reconnect with the family, somebody introduced me to some people from a place called the House of Miracles. The House of Miracles was one of maybe dozens, if not scores, of communal houses around the country that had become like little churches. So here you have all these misfits, cultural misfits, who've come to believe in JC because there was a huge movement at that time. Mm-hmm. The hippie culture created a spiritual and moral vacuum into which rushed all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. For example, the Beatles were the advocates of the Mahesh Yogi, for example, the TM, meditation, etc. There were other spiritual influences along that line, but one of the big ones, most visible ones, was what was called the Jesus movement, spearheaded partly by an evangelist named Billy Graham. Some people will remember who he was. And there were hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of young people who made a transformation from just the whole street scene, the drug culture, into being on fire, very, now, for those of you watching, hold on your strimel, I'm going to use a very strange set of terms, Haredi Christians. But I don't know any other appropriate adjective just that fits into a Jewish framework to be able to understand that we're talking about not just cultural Christians. That was their life. Yeah. Right. But we're talking about people that this is their life focus. And that became my life focus. My life focus became that JC came 2,000 years ago. He's supposed to come back, but there are certain specific events that have to take place before he comes back, and I needed to be part of the enacting of that. So I believed, I received a new life. There was something different going on inside of me, a different mindset, but I also had a different chabura, if you will. I had a different fellowship around me. I was with people who were intensely committed to the end of times, who were looking actively, avidly for the end of this world to come, which was to be preceded by a terrible period of time called the Great Tribulation. There was supposed to be the rise of this one world leader called the Antichrist. And there was a book that came out in 1970 called The Late Great Planet Earth by a guy named Hal Lindsey. I met him a couple times. That book, millions and millions of copies. So all of a sudden, the seed of that book planted in the mind of a generation an apocalyptic expectation that this is going to wrap up. In 1975, none of us in that milieu expected to see the year 2000. We thought that 2000 would be the ushering in of what's called the millennium, 1,000 years of peace on earth, but it would be preceded somewhere in there by 7 years of hell on earth. And that is, when we talk about evangelicals, and yeah, I'm talking about Christian Zionists and those who support Israel, that's an important embedded part of their thinking, that this is all leading towards something. Now, I think that probably should weave in here a thread a little bit about the Jewish people. One of the things I learned when I went to Bible college, and by the way, I should mention, I did go back to a college program. I finished my high school education and went on to college. I actually went to 6 different colleges. I could not write. I was a It's funny today because I'm published, but at that stage, I just couldn't put 5 thoughts, 3 thoughts, 2 thoughts together with any cohesion or continuity. I didn't have the skills. But through difficulty and that 4-letter word called fail, I learned to do things differently. That's another story in itself. When I went to Bible college, they taught me 2 very baseline ideas about how I should live my life. One, they said, JC is supposed to come back. But before he does, the message of this salvation to all the world, that God sent his son into the world to die, be the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate kapara for all the sins of the world, past, present, and future. And if you believe him, you receive a new life. There's nothing you could do by your deeds that will ever satisfy the righteous standards of God. God gave the law, what's called the Torah, in order to prove that we could never keep it. And then he sent JC to be the one who would be the one who would fulfill all the law and then take the penalty for our failure to keep the law. That's Christian message in a nutshell. Okay, so all you get to do is believe. We would say chaparein on his tzidkas. Right? It's a nice message.
Mm-hmm. It's cute. It's a nice story.
Well, it requires very little.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like you going before the traffic court judge and he says, you know what, guys, just drive lovingly. If you drive lovingly, you'll naturally fulfill all the traffic laws. Gee, that's great.
Yeah.
But it said, don't turn right. That's red light there. No, don't, just be loving, you know. Oh, it's okay. My son paid the penalty for your traffic violation.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of how it looks like. The other thing besides proclaiming to all the world this message that salvation had come 2,000 years ago and everybody needed to hear it so they could escape, hell, was that the Jewish people from whom the initial message had sprung had to come back in large numbers to believe it. Now, for most of Christian history, for Jews to believe in JC meant forsaking everything about themselves that was Jewish. It meant essentially becoming a goy.
Yeah.
No mezuzah, no Shabbos, no kashrus, nothing, none of that. But about 50 years ago, somebody came up with a brilliant marketing idea. They said, wait a minute, JC was Jewish, the original disciples were Jewish. So Swedish Christians like their heritage, Chinese Christians like their heritage here in America, Jewish Americans could hold on to their culture and also believe in JC at the same time. Because after all, JC is the Jewish Messiah. What's more Jewish than believing in the Jewish Messiah, right? So the founder of a group called Jews for Jesus started this messaging. Now, they are the best known of all the different Messianic groups, but the least, let's say, Jewish in terms of their cultural heritage. From their beginnings back in the late 60s, early 70s, today in America we have over 450, North America, over 450 Messianic congregations. When I was a missionary in Israel, which maybe we'll get to that, there were about 35 congregations, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 what we call Jewish believers. Today there's about 30,000 and some 200 congregations.
That are Jewish.
Yeah.
They're Jewish.
Israeli, yeah.
And they're
Hebrew speaking.
And they were pulled in.
Yeah. So, interestingly, nearly all of them come from Chiluni backgrounds. Mm-hmm. They were Jews for nothing. And along this comes. So, I believed that the Jewish people also, prior to the return of JC, prior to this cataclysm that was going to come on the world, had to come to believe in him, and I wanted to be part of that.
So you wanted to go ahead and start converting as many Jews as possible to believe this?
Well, the Christian scriptures, what we call I call them today the not so New Testament, because what's true isn't new and what's new isn't true. That's a quote from Tovia Singer, my good buddy.
You're good buddy now, but I'm sure you guys.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting the groups that I didn't like back then, like Yad Lachem. I've probably spoken dozens of times for Yad Lachem to help them along the way. It's fun. You just don't make plans.
Yeah, right.
Or at least don't tell God; He'll laugh at you. So, the life path that it's just so unexpected because I remember going to my pastor, my leader in the church I was part of. I was part of a very large church in Southern California.
How large? Well,
when I started, there were 800 people. He had started with 18. I got there were 800. When I left, there were 10,000.
10,000 people part of this church.
Right, exactly. And then it swelled to about 12,000. it was a big. There were a few mega churches that's springing up around the West Coast in those days. Calvary Chapel was one of them, which went on to become a denomination unto itself. And I was part of a similar type of group that all of these Pentecostal groups had sprung out of a serious revival in the early 1900s, Azusa Street revival. And there was a major Pentecostal revival that sprung out of a place called Azusa Street in downtown Los Angeles. I think it was 1904. And from that come the groups like Assemblies of God and Foursquare and a host of other groups that in those days were backwater, other side of the track kinds of denominations. Today they're front and center. Right. They've really replaced what we used to call the mainstreams, like the Lutherans and the Episcopalians.
A lot going on. Momo, you're from LA. I'm glad you turned out religious, Orthodox.
Yeah, dude.
You didn't...
How long did this stage of your life last?
So I was in Christianity for about 20 years.
Wow.
That included going to Israel for a total of 4. First as a student of the Hebrew Bible, first Hebrew language, because I was a student of the Hebrew Bible. I wanted to learn Hebrew for my own biblical studies, but also because I wanted to be able to communicate to Jews in their...
and missionize.
Yes, I didn't call it that, though.
What did you call it?
Well, I called it bringing them home.
Right, that was your belief.
Because for me, a Jew to believe in JC was to be fulfilled, was to be completed. And the Christian scriptures talk a fair bit about this. The one who wrote most of the New Testament, named Paul, puts a priority on to the Jew first. And you see that today in that groups like Jews for Judaism, Rabbi Kravitz and Rabbi Skobach and others, all today friends of mine. I didn't like them in the early days back, but and those who, by the way, counter this effort to reach Jews for Christianity, especially in the Messianic garb, it's a small group of professionals. And I don't know if I put myself in that category, but we all know each other. Everybody knows everybody. And it's like this collective little David HaMelech against this Goliath of
it's like an old
hundreds
school
of
battle,
millions of dollars that are invested every year to reach Jews. The money behind it is unbelievable.
It's crazy. I was recently watching something with my wife, which was on Netflix, and at the end of this movie, I'm like, whoa, this was paid for by the church. Like this was it's like Hollywood. A lot of the films that come out of Hollywood are funded by church, and they have different, scenes and messages throughout these movies that try to chop people, whether it's a moment of prayer from one of the actors and it happens to be Christian, and it's just like, it's so subtle, but it's...
Kirk Cameron is a good case in point. Back in the day, somebody that was part of our church was Pat Boone, the singer, who is... he's in his 80s now, but he was in the 50s. He was like a big pop singer, 50s and 60s, and he and his family were part of the congregation I was part of. We had a lot of Hollywood people there. I won't name drop, but there were quite a few. That's people in my age band and a little younger would remember. So especially in the singing world, one in particular I will name drop was a guy named Barry McGuire, who was very famous, who wrote the song "Eve of Destruction," and that was popular in my
favorite song, no?
So it's my go-to karaoke song.
Is it? But no. Barry became a believer in JC also, and then took all that energy and fame and fame and recognition that he had, and became well known as a Christian singer. So we've had different waves of this down through the last 50 years. We're in another one today with the movement known as Christian Zionism and the kind of flip-flop that's happened. I think it's essential, a kind of precursor to anything else that I say, that I went to Israel to study Hebrew because I wanted to communicate. First of all, I wanted my own spiritual life to be enriched by being able to look at the Bible in the original and not the translation. That would be a long process to get there. And then I also want to be able to talk to Israelis, because Christians don't just come to this stam, by the way. They didn't just wake up in the morning and say, we need to reach the Jews. There is a logical foundation to the activity. What is that logical foundation? They say that there's some 300 different prophecies in the Jewish Bible which point to JC, whether it's the virgin birth, whether it's the crucifixion, get it? whether it's the resurrection, because he was supposedly, died, buried, rose the third day, and a host of other things that are born in Bethlehem, Micah chapter 5, verse 2. So I'd been taught in Bible college these various prophecies, and I'd been also taught that the Jewish people have kind of a partially blind, a condition of blindness on their eyes, that they read the Torah, they read the scriptures, but they don't see these things. And so it was part of the Christian imperative to open their eyes. So I learned all these prophecies. Well, here's where some of the undoing begins. If you can read it in the original and you see that there's disparity between the original and the translation, well, which one do you toss out? The translation.
So in your sort of search to become more religious and learn more, you found discrepancies in what you believed in by learning in Hebrew.
Yeah, there were, and they fell into three categories. And I've heard all of my other friends in this arena, who some of whom are BTs and some of whom are converts themselves. The discrepancies are either a mistranslation, something taken out of context, or I think of a couple cases in the first book of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, something gets cited, but you don't find it anywhere in Tanakh. It's like, well, how'd that happen? So the history behind all that is its own interesting thing for those who are interested in that. But it's enough to know that as a Christian, I didn't question any of that. I took it at face value.
Even at the time, or you started then?
Well, but once I had the what we call the kelim or the kalim, once I had the glasses to see differently, it's like somebody takes you out in the night sky and says, "There's the Big Dipper." Now try to undo seeing the Big Dipper. You can't. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And so it was the same thing for me in terms of the Hebrew text.
We have the great honor of sitting here with Rabbi David M. Cohn.
Shalom Harav.
To discuss a new sefer, a new book, Together Again.
So I understand that there were some particular relationships in your life that were very meaningful and very impactful that sort of led up to the writing of this book, if you're open to sharing.
Sure. So it's funny. It's not funny, but it's interesting in the sense that the book on some level begins with me taking a stroll, a foray in a cemetery in Eretz Yisrael. It's called Eretz HaChaim, the well-known cemetery outside of Beit Shemesh. And pre the pandemic, about 2 weeks before COVID kind of exploded onto the scene before Purim in 2020, right? Not in 2020. So I actually was looking for the kever of one of my very close friends, Rabbi Dr. Brian Galbert. I'm a Kohen, so I have to be very careful in cemeteries in general, but that one in Beit Shemesh
from Boca.
It's from Boca Raton. So Rav Baruch Brian was a very close friend for many years, and I had another friend who was also in that cemetery, Rabbi Yosef Azar, who was a well-known seminary teacher in Yerushalayim. Another friend also, Avi Weiss, who was here from West Hempstead, not far, also a high school friend. All three of these guys were in my chevra. They each were nifter. They all passed away in the last 2.5 years or so. Wow. Each reached the level of being grandparents, Baruch Hashem, before their patira. But I've been thinking a lot just in terms of relationships and the dynamic with memory, in the sense that particularly when you're not able to be with the person in person, right?
Yeah.
So we have Zoom, we have that whole dynamic of connecting with people, but people often forget that we can also connect with people through memory, in the sense that we're not always zocha to be with people directly. Even with Rebbeim and mentors, like I read a lot in the book about how certain personalities have exploded, and you can't really hope to have like a personal maga, a personal relationship with a certain Rebbe. Everybody wants to have like a Rav Muvhak, a Seilacha Rav, and somebody you can really go to. But some of these people are incredibly busy. They can't give you that time, but you can listen to their shiurim online. You can glean from their messages and the potency of what they're sharing, and you can access that in your memory. I mean, I have a very close relationship with Rav Moshe Weinberger, who I talk about in the book, and wrote a haskama on the book, and you can I can glean messages that I had in private conversations with him 20 years ago. I talk to him now less frequently, but there's a power and potency of connecting with people that are present, people that are in the world, but we're not really able to access them all the time. And then people even who unfortunately are no longer here with us, but it doesn't mean that they're gone. They're very much palpable and present, and that's something that's important.
And the title of the book, really, Together Again, is it's almost a play on words. Post-pandemic, we're together again, but even with the people who may have passed on in our lives, there's an aspect of being able to be together again with them.
There's a hischadshus, right? In the sense that you have this concept, look, we're coming on to Yom Noram now. You have the concept of Yizkor, right? And there's always talking about why do we say Yizkor Dafka in the, in the context of Moadim and Yom Kippurim in general is a day which makes a little more sense in the sense that it's Me'ein Olam Haba, Yom Shabbos Menucha, and Yom Kippur is obviously Shabbos Shabboson. And you have this Nakuda of the whole Bechina of Yom Kippur is so helig. It's a different. It's not from this world, right? And Yizkor also is not from this world. But you see that you can access. You can tap into anything. Whether this is just a guf. It's just the levush, right? It's just the essence of a person is their shorish and neshama. We learn svarim. We learn svarim kedoshim of tremendous tzaddikim who lived hundreds of years ago, and yet they're more alive than ever before. Like Rabbi Nachman. They're people who were so makusher to their Torah and their essence, and it permeates the world in which we live today, right? But you can't have maga with the person, right? So, but this is something that we can really do with all different people, and there's so many different relationships we have with our parents, our children, grandparents, business colleagues, associates, people we meet in the street. I'll just add one point here. I'm zocha to say at Daf Yomi Shir in the mornings. I learn with a very small group of people, and sometimes we learn on Zoom, sometimes we learn in person. And maybe this is the most pashut nakuda, but just the ability to be present, to sit here with you guys and to feel your energy, to see your faces. It's just not the same. Everybody knows this. Maybe it's lazy and it's easier to just use the screen, but to be with people and to connect with them in person. And if, again, there are other levels if we can't do that, but then we can always be reconnecting with all different types of people wherever they may be.
Beautiful. Wow. This book can be purchased on rabbidavidmcohn.com. Go ahead. There's a lot more on there for you, but go ahead and get your hands on this book.
At this time, you're in Israel and you're sort of missionizing. You're trying to get Jews. And first of all, I can imagine Israel is not too fond about that. Or are they? No,
they're not.
They're not friendly of people coming to Israel to try to convert people to Judaism.
And I never would have said that that's what I was doing, first of all. And I have to just kind of insert here that my first time in Israel, I went at two phases. One was as a student, and I actually got kicked out of my first kibbutz for missionary activity. That's a long, complicated story. Won't go down that road. But
congrats.
When I left Israel after that, I was on the blacklist, the infamous, Rishima Shchora from Misrad Panim.
So you couldn't go back?
Right. I came back once, and they caught me at the airport and put me on a plane, sent me back.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's another story. Getting off the blacklist, it took like 9-10 months of hard effort. So I'm back to Israel, and I got a job teaching English at a language school, private language school, Kikar Tzion and Ramla, and then I was asked by a certain Christian group that had Christian groups and scattered around 10 different kibbutzim if I would join their leadership structure, which I did. And part of my task, while we were all volunteers in kibbutz doing our daily stuff 8 hours a day, we had these groups that would have prayer cell and Bible study and what we called worship times where we get together and sing, and we'd pray for the kibbutzniks and we'd pray for the land of Israel. And part of my job was to teach these young people that came from all over the world for a year of service how not to share their faith with Israelis, how to do something that we called friendship evangelism. Because we said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So you need to show people that you're here because you love them. The message here is we're here because we love the Jewish people. And if you talk to any evangelical Christian today, especially those who call themselves Christian Zionists, they'll say, well, the sign of a real Christian is a love for the Jewish people. Real Christians love Jews.
And we see that, it's something that we see here and there. I know Yad La'achem is involved with sort of combating that, where every few years you see that, in this community, someone who seemingly acted like a Jew, lived like a Jew, was sort of integrated in the Jewish community, in fact, was an evangelical Christian.
I'm very aware of that story.
And that's sort of what you're mentioning, that path was be friendly. Don't show them your faith. Don't show them your cards, but integrate.
Right. And the person that you're speaking of in this case, this is the famous Michael L. Cohen, or Michael Elk, case is his name. I was involved with a group of other people in that whole process. And he had said that he was really there in Haredi garb, in the role of a Rav, who had studied Kabbalah.
Doing bris milah.
Giving bris milah, writing mezuzahs and giving smicha, messianic smicha to a few shadowy people that we know about. This was like, how did this happen? How did it come to that point? Well, it didn't happen by himself. He was supported by an evangelical group out of North Carolina, North or South Carolina, one of those. And there's more and more of this. I mean, we know there are more people like that. Why would the evangelicals go to that length to embed themselves almost like a cell into the Jewish world? Because they really do believe that JC's coming back and the Jewish people are going to have their eyes open. And Michael Elk said, I want to be there amongst them, connected to them, so I can help them when they get over the shock of what's going to be revealed to them when Messiah comes back, and turns out that it's his second time, not his first time.
And you were on that path to sort of doing similar. Yeah. And somewhere along the way, it's sort of like, you mentioned that, man plans and God laughs. Mm-hmm. It was sort of probably the biggest humbling experience for you when you started realizing like this doesn't add up.
Well, there was a big gap between when I came to the realization and then ultimately left the church. So after several years in Israel, in kibbutz, I left and I was really quite broken. So I went back to the safety of the big church where I came from. But after 2 years, I couldn't do it. One of the things I'd done while I was at the big church again was I went to a counter-missionary rally sponsored by the newly dedicated Chabad house of UCLA. And the three people spoke, including a fiery young rabbi with a red beard named Ben-Zion Kravitz, who was also a dear friend today. And these three rabbis, Rabbi Shochet from Toronto, Rabbi Lisbon, and Rabbi Kravitz, laid out the case why everything that I believed and everything that I was doing vis-a-vis reaching Jewish people was, can you say, pure sheker? It really was. It was absolute falsehood. I was a broker of deception, and it just really hit me. And so,
wow. What was their goal in that venue?
So what was the catalyst for even having the meeting in the first place?
Yeah.
So 1984 Olympics, all the world was coming to LA. And so for anybody in the evangelical missionary related world, this was
Super Bowl.
Yeah. It was.
Let's get them.
Mamish was. So there were very sophisticated outreaches in the Jewish community. People were going door to door, literature. There were music groups on the street. There was all kinds of efforts to reach the Jews as well. And so the Jewish community said, this ain't happening. So they had this rally. And I was told by the church you got to go check this out. So I did.
Little did they know.
Oh boy!
They were primarily talking to Jews, presumably.
Yes, but there were
the church was planting you there to get sort of like what are they
the inside story. What are the Jews up to here?
Okay? They lost them.
Wow.
One of the things I did there, they had some literature for sale, including a book by Gerald Siegel, who is an excellent researcher on this area. He got fascinated by it years ago. He's written a number of books on different aspects of Jewish responses to Christian missionary interpretations of the Jewish Bible. So he had one there. It was his first book called The Jew and the Christian Missionary. It was Jewish answers to, and I'd never heard Jewish. I didn't think most of the Jews that I met were, blissfully spiritually illiterate. They might have a bar mitzvah or whatever, but for the most part,
those are the Jews that you were targeting because
they knew nothing.
They were easy,
right? And so we were able to give them the best of both worlds. I mean, look, what a deal. You can intermarry. You can eat treif. You can, just because JC fulfilled all the mitzvahs for you.
You're just chilling.
You're chilling, chilling with your shrimp cocktail. So
chilling like a villain.
That's it. And yet my eyes progressively opened to, especially I used to sit as my pastoral office in the church and read Jerry Siegel's book. I just go, I don't have an answer for this.
This I'm just like picturing this image where you're sitting in this church where you have 10,000 congregants and you're questioning everything. And it's
you don't want to go there. It was very problematic.
Well, take us back to that rally. Take us back to that experience at that rally, because that's where the seed was planted.
It was one of the I have a few episodes in my life that I call the wrecking ball hitting the wall of my faith and creating these. First, a hairline fracture, like when I got kicked out of the kibbutz for missionary activity. And I started thinking, gee, I wonder, how do I know I'm right? That was the first one. Then there were a series of others. That was a big one. And it was a very energetic rally because there were Christians there. I remember one guy in particular he was Irish. He worked on my Navy or something. And he stood up and talked about how he was a drunken sailor and all this stuff and how he believed and his life was gloriously changed. And I remember Rabbi Shochat, alav shalom, saying, "We're very happy for you that you've had a wonderful life experience and change, but that what you had is for you and not for everybody necessarily." So you give a very logical, intellectual response. Rabbi Shochat, alav shalom, was also very, very wise in this area. So and this was my first encounter with
intellectual
informed Jews, educated Jews who really, these were Torah Jews. I had almost zero encounter with that whole community. You see them by the kotel or whatever, but I'd never had any sustained experience of their thought stream, what was going on in the mindset. I just thought they were stubborn, and I'm thinking, why would you want to volunteer for martyrdom and all these things when, don't you understand that Christians really love you? I want to pause on that for a moment because there's a story I tell. I was in Israel in 1982 during the Mivtza Shlom HaGalil, which is the Peace for Galilee operation, the first Lebanon war. And a lot of volunteers in kibbutzim just raced out of there. Our Christian group stayed. We were like 92 Christians on kibbutz Dafna of 600 members. That was big news. So it got somehow down to the south to the attention of the Jerusalem Post, and they sent a reporter up, religious reporter, not a religious guy, but a religion reporter. Chaim Shapiro, I think was his name. And I was appointed the spokesman for this group, so they said, go meet him. So we're sitting talking, and he's asking, so who are you people, and why are you here, and why are you staying? Everybody else has left. Why do you feel it's your responsibility to stay with these kibbutzniks? And I gave him the whole spiel that, we are your spiritual brothers. We have been grafted into the tree of your faith, according to the New Testament. We believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We believe in the prophets of the Jewish Bible. We believe in your right to be in the land. And we're here to support that. And we're here to come and demonstrate that by giving a year or more of our life service to help build up the land and to benefit the Jews here in Israel. And, of course, everybody celebrates that kind of messaging. There are various groups in Israel, Ad HaYom Hazeh, that are doing that. And so then he got into the whole issue of what's a valid Christian? And I said to him what I just said to you. The sign of a real Christian is love for Jews. I said, real Christians love Jews. He said, well, I have a little problem with that because when I look at Christian history, I see something very opposed to that. And so I gave him my simple four-word answer, which was, they weren't real Christians. So it's a kind of circular reasoning. If the sign of a real Christian is love for Jews, but somebody didn't love the Jews, then obviously they weren't real Christians. He said, well, I look at it a different way. Now, I don't know if he had a Gemara cup somewhere in the recesses of his yichus.
This is Chaim Shapiro.
This is Chaim Shapiro, right. Totally secular guy. He said, if the sign of a real Christian is a love for Jews, and for most of Christian history, there was not a love for Jews, then I can only conclude that for most of Christian history, there have not been real Christians. Yeah.
The crowd was wild.
So this, again, was my...
that was a wrecking ball to the...
That was one also. But what was happening was I was meeting the Jewish mind. This is these. It doesn't make a difference. Chiloni, the neshama is the neshama. Right? Yeah. So I was meeting these big neshamas that had what to say, and they were delivering messages to me. So the net effect was that in 1986 I left the church world, and I became a goy for nothing for about 8 years.
For how long?
8 years.
8 years. Wow.
I wandered. I played peekaboo with God in churches. I'd go in here and whatever. But bottom line, I played around with other spiritual alternatives, looked into this, looked into that. The men's movement, sitting around drumming, holding the truth stick, telling your truth. It's stupid stuff.
Just searching.
Yeah. Just kind of back a little bit of, hippie regression.
Was there like a moment of like, I imagine that moment where you left the church and you had spent 20 years on this, like of just failure, defeat, of like, what is going on here? That emotion that you were going through, like, can you take us through that?
Wow, that's a good intuitive question. Well, it's one thing to be a broker of. I talked about being a broker of deception. For most of the time, I thought I was a broker of certainty, of absolute truth, that there was one way to God. I knew that way. I was going to help you find it, in the most loving, reasonable way that I could. Because I don't want you to go to hell.
Right.
Momo, your skin's too fair for that kind of environment. It's not going to work out for you.
Momo can use it for like 30 seconds. Get a little burnt.
So, my motivation was, I thought, out of a real love for people. And all of a sudden, there's this total unraveling of faith, family, fellowship, everything. I'm out. I'm working 2 jobs and not very well because my emotional state was just pretty shattered.
Yeah.
I lost my God, I thought. My framework of my mindset of clarity. I'm running into a world that I'm not so familiar with now, a secular world, because I'd been mostly in a Christian world. And nothing seemed to be right. And so I went from, kind of like my mother, I kind of drifted from job to job, trying to figure myself out. This is funny. I was off and on in touch with my father, the shadow figure on the periphery of my life. I called him up one day. I called him and I said, Dad, you've been all over the world. You've done all kinds of things. Yeah, I have. I said, I'm in this place in my life now. I'm like 33 and I don't know what to do with myself. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, you go somewhere nobody want to go. You do something nobody want to do. You have yourself a job. This is a guy that didn't finish the 8th grade, but had the simplicity of country wisdom. Mm-hmm. And that's what he'd done. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He was very monocular in his life focus, and he would simply go and do the job. So I thought, okay, take inventory. What could I do? Well, I had gone to graduate school to study linguistics. That's not pasta, by the way. That's something else. I taught English as a second language in Israel. I thought maybe there are English teaching jobs somewhere in the world that I could go to, and I could find some framework of stability and parnasa, whatever. I didn't know the word parnasa, but so I called it my alma mater. Yeah, in Pasadena, California. I said, any English jobs anywhere in the world? They said, funny you should call. We got a request last week from a recruiter in Florida who's filling employment billets for the Royal Saudi Naval Forces Technical Institute of Naval Studies, RSNF-TINSF.
Of course they are.
TINS, yes. Yes, of course. And once you understood why, what kind of place it was, you realized why they were constantly filling billets for this place. Long story short, I sort of Palestinianized my resume. And I got accepted for a job in Saudi Arabia. So I ended up teaching for good 2.5 years in this naval academy for the Saudis. So, and the Saudis had an interesting walk-on part in me discovering my home in Judaism. Of course, this was the time of the first Gulf War. So that was very exciting. A lot of metal rain coming from Saddam Hussein in those days, especially the area where I was. And I'm laughing because we had a few Palestinian teachers amongst the faculty. There were occasions when I learned a lot of Arabic. I speak Arabic a lot. But sometimes they're just like default in my head to a Hebrew word. So I wanted to say the word like, but, walakin, and I said, aval. And they look at me like, and it seemed that I knew a little too much about Palestinian geography, like Beit Jala, Beit Sahur, some of these other places around Beit Lechem. And long story short, I was actually ejected from that job because they thought maybe I was some involved in intelligence. The real capper that messed it up was I had a fax machine, and the Saudis just they couldn't understand why I had a fax machine. So
yeah, you know what? I think it's like the same nowadays. If you have a fax machine, like something's a law.
It's really something. Well, the truth was,
I like when people put it in their email signature too.
Right, like your fax, like no one's faxing you.
Your office, your mobile, and your fax number. Like the fax numbers in that email signature.
Like if someone from Gen Z heard a fax come in, they'd probably call the cops.
Sure.
Like what is going on here? Right. Why is there a paper just showing up?
That's right. Well, the truth was, it was $2.60 a minute to make a phone call to America, and it was a 2-week round trip for a letter. So I made the investment, got a fax machine. Nice. It seemed, a smart idea. And the other guys in the faculty were able to use it. It was nice. But for the Saudis, who are inherently xenophobic, they just everybody's suspect.
Yeah.
So I was ejected from Saudi Arabia and came to America and began really the Jewish phase, which came in two major sections. One was the 9-month course I took at a Reform congregation in Irvine, California, and I had a 2-for-1 special, which meant that I had a conversion and a bar mitzvah within a 3-day span.
How old were you?
I was in my 40s. I don't know, 45. I was somewhere around there. This was 97.
Wow.
And so I was so proud. I was so excited. I thought, wow, I'm in, man. I'm in.
Why did you decide to become Jewish? Like, what was that moment of saying, I mean, if I was putting myself in your shoes, I did religion for 20 years.
Right.
I'm about to jump into another one. I'm going to be a little skeptical.
So initially it was a dare to myself, because after dabbling around with all this stuff, I'll tell you, part of the credit I would have to give to Rav Aryeh Kaplan, alav shalom, his first name I took as my second name, Gavriel Aryeh Sanders. I read a book, I found a book in Phoenix in a bookstore called Jewish Meditation. And I read it, and while there were many things in there I did not understand, when he talks about the Amidah as a meditation, etc., a lot of nomenclature that was specific to Jewish liturgy, all of a sudden I realized that what he was saying about Judaism was true, that Judaism is really an Eastern religion. So there's a lot of mysticism in it. There's a lot of deep thought into it, and that the practice, even though it looks sort of like, if you think of it like there's a lot that's rigid, kind of like the exoskeleton of an insect. It's really hard on the outside, but inside there's a lot of life going on there. So you have to get through the exoskeleton to get to that life element. So I realized that about Judaism, that there's a lot externally that seems rigid, but inside there's something dynamic happening going on that's animating what appears to be outside of rigidity. There's a life element there that I need to connect to. So I thought, on a dare to myself, I thought, well, I'll go investigate. So I heard about the course, took the program. I thought I could always say no. But the more I hung around with these nice Reform people, the more I liked them. It was cool. And within a few months after my quick and easy, light and breezy, very few things really seriously required conversion, I guess it was the Maggid Shir for the Parsha study on Shabbat morning. Me. I couldn't spell Rashi, much less read Rashi's script. And we're sitting around talking about the Parsha and the Jews in Mitzrayim, if they ever were there, and Moshe, if he ever existed. They went to Har Sinai, if that really happened, or maybe that was like a hallucination from psilocybin or magic mushrooms in the desert, or whatever. These are very intelligent people offering one discount after another as to the authenticity and the veracity of the Torah. And it kind of hit me at one point that, if the book isn't true, then maybe neither are you. To think about that, like the book is the ultimate validation. And there were other things I began to work on to say, I feel like a guy, I have a credit card that works at Macy's, but I could never get a meal with this or an airline ticket. I need something that's more like a black hat American Express card, So I actually thought it through, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go the whole distance. Because I wasn't universally Jewish. I was narrowly niched within a certain community.
And when you say the distance, you mean Orthodox?
Yeah. So I began to reach out, and there was a rabbi in the community just down the street, Beit Jacob. So I went to see Rabbi Joel and spoke to him, and it was helpful. Then I went to see Rabbi Alta Tannenbaum, who's still in Irvine today. I don't know if you know the Tannenbaum family, but they are amazing people. His wife, Bini, is one of the daughters of J.J. Hecht, alav shalom. Mm-hmm. And they were so gracious to me. They took me in. Rabbi Tannenbaum used to have classes on Shabbos afternoon just for me. Other people would come, but he was really doing it for my benefit. Right. And I started another path of conversion with the Rabbinical Council of California.
RCC.
Tough group. Machmir.
Yeah.
At that point, I was kind of Mekel. So when I sat before Rabbi Union Shlita, just a giant in Torah, he said to me those sobering words. He says, and it's really related to what you just said. You already left one major religion. Why should we take the risk that you should come into this one, and maybe 5-10 years down the line, you come to a place of restlessness, irritability, discontent that's not working for you, and you should leave it. Well, that's kind of on us because we missed something. So we'd rather not take the chance, to tell you the truth, because you know enough about Judaism to be very beneficial as a Ben Noach, to follow the 7 Noachide laws. You should learn about that, teach that, share that, do something for people with that. But to become a Jew? And then he suggested that I read a book called With Perfect Faith by Rabbi Bleich, a big thick book on the Yud Gimel Ikarim. It was very intimidating because it had a lot of words I didn't understand. He said, come back after the holidays. Do you know how many holidays are in the Jewish calendar? My old grandma would say, a whole bunch of. Like a bunch of carrots. And I did come back. And they saw that I think that I was really serious. And they took a chance. But they also took their time.
Yeah.
In most settings, you do a year, you do a life cycle of what's happening so people can experience the various holidays and et cetera. They took about, I don't know, close to 2 years with me, about 18, 19 months, I think. And every 3 or 4 months I would come back. I was like a little puppy dog. Mikvah? What? And it was coming up on Hanukkah at the end of 1999. And I really wanted to make a bracha on a sufganiyah. That counted. I'd been practicing. They'd given me a Rabbi Asher Byron, who was from Far Rockaway. And I've been studying, and I'd been driving up from Irvine for a lot of, at least 2-3 times a month to be Shabbos in the Hood, I called it. I hung out with Anshe Emes, with Rabbi Yitzchak Summers. It's a wonderful, wonderful community. I connected with the Aish community, with something they had in LA called the Happy Minyan and Benny's Minyan at Beit. I just was trying to integrate myself into as many places as I could. And also I did something I call Operation In Your Face. What's Operation In Your Face? I thought, okay, these different members of my Beit Din, I'm going to put myself in a position where they see me often. Even though it's a 50-mile drive, I'm going to be in places where they see I'm there. Okay? So, and I thought it would help, They still took their time.
Yeah.
And I still had the tough test at the end where they grilled me about this bracha and that bracha and this white rice and brown rice. But Baruch Hashem, for my good friend Rabbi Shmuel Feld, who works with the Mayberg Foundation today, wonderful educator. And he ended up by default on as a dayan at the mikveh because someone couldn't make it. But I remember standing in the mikveh in Los Angeles, and they said to me, there was the third push away. Because you're supposed to push people away 3 times. Pushing someone away in the mikvah's kind of an odd place, but I remember one of them standing over in the distance said, now, you don't have to do this. You know enough about Judaism. I thought, I've heard this before. You know enough about Judaism to be very useful advocate for the Jewish people. But to take on what you're about to take on, it's a life sentence.
Can't undo it.
No, there's no unraveling of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can't unravel it the way you unraveled your previous.
You cannot hit the button that says unsubscribe.
Yeah.
So it was very serious. And so I just simply crossed my arms and said, what's that bracha again? Ala tefillah. And that then, Mark Wynn Sanders, named after the drugstore, went into the waters of the mikveh of Los Angeles, and a guy by the name of Gavriel Aryeh Ben Avram Avinu emerged. Now, the name Gavriel Aryeh has both particular significance, but also it has more universal significance. Particularly, why? It's my name. Yeah. Okay, but what's the universal aspect of it? Well, Gavriel is a malach, and an Aryeh is an animal. And so this suggests a hybrid relationship inside of the human being. And so Adam HaRishon was both infused with a divine spark, that's a spiritual component, and his animalistic nature. And the life path, the trajectory of every Jew is for the angel part of himself or herself to ride upon the lion. So we don't kill the beast. We tame the beast. That's why we say in morning davening, the Yetzer is to become a servant. And of course, the greatest teacher we'll ever have in life is that which wants to take us away from the path.
And I might even add more than taming. We might even harness it.
Yes.
We might use some of that energy that the Nefesh Bahamas gives us and utilize it for good.
So now we're walking down the life lessons that I think are really significant. And I'll mention a couple of them. And part of it is that I remember sitting with my dear friend, Yedid Nefesh Baruch Klein, from here in the neighborhood. And he taught me the relationship between the word ratzon and sinor. That the same letters, ratzon, sinor. That to do Hashem's will, you need some kind of a conduit. As I like to say, with a conduit, you can do it.
Nice.
Right? And so
it's your type of line right there.
So if you think of a conduit, it could be a flexible, it doesn't have to be rigid like a pipe. It could be a hose. That's a conduit, all right? But if you want to use the hose and wash down the driveway, what do you have to do to turn the gentle flow of the water into something that has enough force to it? You have to constrict that flow. Of course, if we go back to Kabbalistic thought, we have this whole framework of constrictions and emanations, but that we don't want to go there. As far as the practical side of our life is concerned, I put my thumb over the end of the hose and I narrow the flow to increase the force. And there's a powerful metaphor in there for Jewish life, that we live in a more narrowly challenged world. We don't have to. Our battle is not between good and bad. It's really between good and best. And so we're constantly striving to see Hashem's best. ArtScroll just put out very recently, the last couple of weeks, Yesod V'Shorosh Avodah by Rabbi Alexander Ziskin, about 250-year-old Musar Sefer. They did the first four Sha'arim. And that whole book is about one simple concept. How do I live in such a way to bring nachas ruach, or nachat ruach, as I say, to the Borei? Understanding, first of all, I am a nivra. B'terem kol yitzir nivra. I'm created, which means automatically I have a creator, which means I have responsibility to. Now I can run away. I could try anyway. I can live as if there is no creator, or I can submit to the lifestyle, the guidelines, the mandates, the directives, and live within the pipeline, the conduit of those constrictions that cause there to be greater force in my life to accomplish more. I get more done through the submission to that. So, another combination of the word for ratzon or tzinor is nitzor. We say toward the end of the Shemona Esrei, the davening, nitzor, about my lips, really to close up. So that's like we call a mitzvah lo taseh, something to refrain from doing. And a lot of Jewish life is about holding back, the gevura aspect of restraint, holding back, so that we can again increase the amplitude of that force that's within us. So that's one of the things I find absolutely fascinating about Jewish life, because I've been in this way and I've been living in not this yarmulke, but a few of them, this is coming up my 23rd year, either 23rd, 24th, I don't know. I used to be the youngest Jew in the room for a long time, with the whitest hair. And I find this life to be altogether amazing because it's not a religion. So when people say to me, well, when did you become religious? I said, I don't know, I'm not. And I have good source for that statement. It's not just me being cute. If you go to the book Horeb, all right, by Raphael Shamshon Hirsch, I think in the introduction, I think it's around page 35, maybe about a quarter of the way down, Rabbi Feiner could tell us all exactly where it is. He says that it's incorrect to put Judaism on the same shelf as all the other religions of the world, because that gives it, some kind of it's parody, I suppose. And it's not, because Judaism, as he goes on to develop in this next paragraph, he says it's a relationship embodied in two words. What are the two words that embody this relationship, that distinguish it from religion? It says that Hashem brought us up out of the land of Egypt to be li la'am. In Hebrew, it's 2 words, 4 words in English. To me, a people. Li la'am. And within those 2 little words, you have ben adam lamakom, li, ben adam l'chavero, la'am. So one of the things I also find fascinating about Judaism is you look at the nature of we're in the season of the 10 days. And what are we saying all the time? Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu. And here again is this two-sided relationship that we have with Hashem. He's our Father and He's our King. And both of those have very specific behavioral, attitudinal commitments that come along with it. And so I find in the world of Musar in particular, I'm very drawn to Musar. I'm drawn to a few things, a few influences. I was drawn to Reb Volbe, alav shalom, when I heard somebody give a shiur on Ale Shur when I was still learning about that. I thought, who is that? What is there? Something about that. I had the chance to meet him in 2003 for about 20 minutes. And Reb Volbe said two very significant things that I promised after that 20-minute meeting that I'll always share this anywhere I had a chance. Because I think everyone just needs to hear this. I was there with some family members, and I asked Rav Volby, as we're speaking in Hebrew, I said, what do we need today more than anything else? And he looked at me with those beautiful blue eyes of his, and he said, Adam tzarich emunah. So I asked the natural follow-up question, which you would have asked, okay, as good interviewers. How do you get it? And he picked up one of his forum, not Alei Shor, by the way, and he said, 2 words, Katufkan. So basically he's saying, Tzei Lumad. Okay, go learn. And that...
So he picked up a sefer not Alei Shor?
Not Alei Shor.
Which one?
I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was called Bein Sheish LaAsor, which was a compendium or a likut of lectures that he'd done in mostly secular places like kibbutzim, and he used to speak for the army, the military headquarters. And so that message says it all. And if you look in the Musar, in the Musar domain, you find so many of the forums speak about that you got to study it to cultivate it. That's the method by which it's planted, by which it's seeded and watered and weeded in the soul of a person. So, and this time of year in particular, as we do this cheshbon nefesh and do the soul searching that comes along with it this time of year, is a great time to recommit. I know specifically what I'm committing to in this coming year as far as what I know I need to work on in my life. And the beautiful thing is the resources that I need to cultivate that quality are there. I was in Israel over the summer for 2 months. I met some amazing people. Again, I won't name drop, but I met some really big neshamas. One I will name drop, and that's the founder of the Hidabrut Outreach Empire, Rabbi Zamir Cohen. I sat with him twice. I listened to his content steadily. I have just a regular diet. He doesn't speak English. He speaks a magnificent Hebrew, beautifully presented, deep thought, clear, and I've heard him several times talk about the importance of recognizing the nutrition of the soul. What is the food of the soul? Okay? So it's 3 things, he says. Number 1, it's midot. Number 2, it's Torah itself, learning of Torah. And the third thing is practice of the mitzvot. The mitzvot are the natural interface between the spiritual world and the physical world. By making a bracha, for example, I affect the intrinsic nature of this thing I'm about to consume. You know, in Hasidic thought, we talk about elevating the sparks of something. Okay, so there's a whole fascinating dynamic going on as I just go through my life as a Jew. Now, there are some who are what I call mechanical Jews, automatons, robots. Okay, they just do what they do. You know, I've taught in some of the yeshivot around here. I'm subbing right now in a couple of them, and so I've seen the inside story of what kind of goes on in the mind of a lot of the teens in the neighborhood. They're kind of doing their thing, you know. But at some point, hopefully, the recognition comes of the pure, powerful inner significance of this thing that I'm doing that I think is just part of Jewish culture, but it's really part of Jewish continuity. It's one of the secrets to keep us going. There's a whole other lecture I do called 7 Reasons I Became a Jew. They all begin with the letter C.
Well,
Cholent is the first one. No, it's not.
We'll link that. As we wind down, I have one question. It's really a quick one. In that church, 10,000 congregants, I'm just curious, how many of those people are Jewish, are born Jews?
That's a great question. I see why you're suited for what you do here. This wonderful program. By the way, I want to thank both of you.
Thank you.
On behalf of many, 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 many thousands of us that engage with you through this this medium.
Thank you. Cliffhanger, by the way, for the answer.
I'll get to this. No, but it's just wonderful what you guys have done. It's a great testament to a simple vision that just people respond to. Because we all want significance. We want to interact with people that have what to say.
Thank you so much.
So, but to answer his question, I estimated that there were some 300 to 400 Jews in that 10,000 member congregation. Without a doubt, they were either Jews for nothing, majority, or there were a few that might have had some kind of day school experience, like conservative or reform.
Hopefully they're listening now.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it?
Yeah,
That'd be nice.
I imagine it's an avodah for you to sort of let go of not trying to do active work in that setting, in light of your own life experience and knowing how much you now have to offer there.
I'm kind of persona non grata. I'm part of a group from that group of Christians on the kibbutz, because I still have some linkage there. And I read one day a comment somebody said about how, he left his faith and he became a Jew and he's some kind of rabbi, and they just, it's terrible. It's just terrible what happened to him. So I'm a reprobate, a backslider, an apostate. They have a lot of nice Scrabble words to describe me. So it's, but listen, I didn't plan to live under a Borsalino on Shabbat. I really didn't plan to be sitting here with you guys, and none of this was part of, I don't know what I was planning, but it was just, for most of my life, it was just simple survival. Make it through the next day.
You hitchhiked in Dallas and you ended up here in Cedarhurst.
Yeah, I did. Listen, Baruch Hashem, and I, as I said to you earlier, I have to credit your father with, because I was in the 3rd edition of the Five Towns Jewish Times.
3rd edition ever.
Third print.
Wow.
Right. It was around Halloween time, and the ink was black and orange.
Nice.
In that edition, yeah. So
that's good.
And he helped me get back into radio, which I loved, and through that I've done hundreds of broadcasts and hundreds of commercials, and that's what I really love, is to share the simple message. I like to end with one thing if I can.
Sure.
My favorite, I have a number of favorite phrases I've learned along the way. Mikol melamdai skalti. But in Pirkei Avot, when it tells us twice, Aseh lecha rav, as we know, again, and I love the Hasidic way of kind of turning things on its head to extract deeper meaning from it. So it's not just the pshat that's there. Aseh lecha rav. Okay, we know what that means. You should connect yourself to someone who's greater than you are, who's a rav, who answers questions, etc. Okay, we all know that. Hopefully have that. But if we turn it on its head and say, aseh, make, do, lecha, for yourself, make yourself greater. So this is Jewish life. Always striving, never arriving. It's an endless journey. Lech lecha. Okay, I heard my dear friend Rabbi David Aaron talk about this. The Jewish journey really is one to discover each one, our potentiality, how to tap it, how to release it, actualize it, and use it to benefit the world around us. So that then we end up making others great. Now, Shakespeare said, some are born great, some acquire greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. The Jewish people, all three. We come from the great Avram Avinu. We acquired greatness through the difficulties that we've been through as a people. And greatness has been thrust upon us because in very challenging times from the outside world, the true us has had to rise and take a position that otherwise we wouldn't have. Right. You see that from what happened in the show, et cetera. And that's where we are. It's great to be a Jew. And it has nothing to do with any accolades or, it's tough. Most of my Jewish life, I felt like the little kid holding onto his father's hand, trotting to keep up. Especially times like this. Slichot is like, how am I going to say all this? I mean, look, I'm pretty good with Hebrew, but that's not easy Hebrew. And to try, I remember speaking, I worked with ArtScroll for about 10 years, and I remember speaking to Rabbi Nosson Sherman. He should live and be well and do magnificent things. Great neshama. And I asked him, of all the different things that you've produced here at ArtScroll, what's your favorite? He said, I like the interlinear. I said, why do you like the interlinear? He said, especially with, he mentioned slichos. He said, because I can connect with words. And I think ArtScroll is a wonderful example of people who achieve greatness by making it accessible. And today we have accessibility to Jewish resources in an unprecedented way. There's no reason that we can't learn. There's no reason we can't grow. There's no reason we can't make this world phenomenal.
Like Gavriel Aryeh Sanders, you definitely inspired us, and I think hopefully our listeners as well. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you guys. Gemach Sematova.
Amen.
What a story. I know Rabbi Gavriel for a very long time. He mentioned he knew my father, and this is the first time I really got to sit down and hear his story from him. It's like fascinating that someone can have such a journey. He literally chose Yiddishkeit. He like went through the process of, learning all the facts, and here he is.
It really is. And I think it gives us an opportunity, anyone that might have been born Jewish or born frum, to just really appreciate what we were born into.
Take his word for it.
Just heard a man who traveled the world to find what so many of us were just given. And like, I challenge all of us to just find ways to choose our Yiddishkeit.
Choose your Yiddishkeit. I like that.
You know?
Yeah. One of the ways to choose your Yiddishkeit is to be kind. You know? Be Kind week went really well. We only have a few sweatshirts left in here.
Nice.
So if you want a sweatshirt, go ahead to meaningfulminute.org. Get yourself a sweatshirt. You like that?
Very nice. Oh,
that one's gone.
And be kind.
And be kind, because if you could choose anything, choose your Yiddishkeit and to be kind.
And rise by lifting others.
And rise by lifting others.
And be kind.
And be kind. And of course, if you have more time in your hands and you're driving in the car and you want to listen to more podcasts, Meaningful Minute has more to offer for you, like Touro. We have deep, meaningful conversations with Alex Fletcher and Rifki Silver. We have the daily thread with me and my father. We break down news stories 4 times a week. So go ahead, type it in Spotify, Apple, check it out. You might enjoy it, you might hate it, but either way, just give it a shot. Have a great week, guys.
Thanks.